I want to go now into a couple sessions from the course itself. So in book 3, session 2, the title is "The System is the Solution." So what does it mean?
That's a really good question. Well, let's first of all maybe think about what do we mean by a system. So within a system, the sum of all the parts will always be greater than the whole. It's not just the sum of the parts. So in a system, we have elements. Those elements are interconnected and interrelated, and they all serve a higher function. Putting them together serves a higher function. There's some great YouTube clips, by the way, by a guy called Russell Ackoff. That's if anyone's interested. Really cool to listen to on this, and he gives the analogy of a motor car, right? You can go and sit on your nice driver's seat, sit down on the seat, but you're not going to go anywhere, right? You have a steering wheel attached to some wheels. You're not going to go anywhere. They're all the elements of the car. The seat serves its function as a seat, right? You're sitting in it. That's what it does. But what's its higher purpose? Its higher purpose is to be part of a system that moves you from one destination to another. On its own, the seat doesn't do anything. The engine can sit, and you can get the engine on a workbench in an auto yard. The engine can run. Great, but it's not taking you from A to B. It needs everything else as part of the component, The other analogy, think of the human body. The heart on its own, it has a job as a cardiovascular system. But take it out of the body, what does it do? It has to link to the respiratory system. It has to link to the muscles. Mm-hmm. So understanding that there has to be connectedness and that has to serve a higher purpose. The next thing then on it is to understand that systems nest in amongst each other. So let's talk about, think about it. Let's talk about speed, right? George talks about nesting systems in his talk as well, that you have the game, and the game consists of 15 players. So the 15 players are a system. The tactics that they're playing to is a system. The individual player in that is part of the system. Take one player out of that, you've no longer got that system. That player, as you just said, I've got the player who's run 60 meters fastest in the league. But if he can't do that as part of the 15, or he makes bad decisions because every time he gets it, he tries to run as fast as he can, that doesn't serve a higher purpose or function. He in himself is his own system. He can run really, really fast. But if he's not connected to the team with that speed, it's not part of that higher system. So in a way, it helps you then just sort of keep thinking down the chain. And it's not to be reductionist, but the why the system is the solution for is that if you do analysis of your player and you see that they just don't have any force production. So what system are you going to work on? You're going to keep sprinting them. Well, that's one option. Or you might say, they need to be better at finding force. Well, they're going to find force in two ways. Either they've got to develop the ability to produce more force, or they find more force by becoming a better mover in terms of where their foot placements are. So there's two systems, right? Let's just go sprint and let's work on technique, or let's get you stronger. One nests within the other. Which one's right, which one's wrong? That's OODA loop, like you mentioned just now, right? You've made your observation. You're looking at the systems that are interplaying with each other. You're looking at the elements within each of those systems. And in this case, we're saying, maybe they're not strong enough. Okay, so I've orientated myself now around that problem, and I've got some decisions to make. I'm either just going to run and work on technique, on foot placement, so they're accessing the force available, or I'm just going to get them a lot stronger. And so you make that decision. You've got limited time. You've got a call to make. You can't necessarily say, well, I'm going to do both. Maybe you just got to let the training in the games themselves, and maybe bring a little bit of awareness to them of foot placements. They're not striding out too far, or they're getting a better projection angle as they're moving off. Give them a little bit of awareness of that, so you touch upon that. But the areas that you're really going to tax and train is going to be strength. you know. So you put that plan into action. You've now got to observe that plan in action. How do I know it's working? So you might have some measurables, you know. You might speak to the player. You might look at that move that coach has said, I need him to get there a little bit quicker. So you've got levels of assessment then nested within this system as well that you can look at, not just your battery of tests telling you he's got quicker, you know, because that's then only one part, right? It now needs to connect to the next level of the system. So hopefully that gives a little bit of practical example, but a little bit of theory behind it as well.
It does. And I like that you brought the OODA loop back in this, but from the coach's perspective, and us as coaches, our job, we can actually, you know, we have to go through that lens and through that decision-making process, and then taking action, and then observing again to decide what the next step is to make. So it's funny how that, you know, a bit of a meta conversation between, well, here there's the decision that the player needs to make on the field, but there's also then the decision that the coach has to make in regards to how he's going to program and plan, move forward, reanalyze, reassess, and go with it.
Yeah, and there's constraints to that, right? I mean, you know, let's take when I was with Sheffield Eagles and they were part-time. I might have had access to that weight room once a week, but I'm out on the field with them 3 times a week, you know? So individually around the squad, how do I deal with that one player now? Well, really you can, but you need to mailbox, what Dan Paff calls mailboxing, maybe organize your players, you know, into different issues that they have. So when you are on that field practice, you can set up your 25, 30 minutes, maybe with slightly different emphases. You know, maybe these people over here are doing plyometric jumps, you know, into sprints. Maybe these people who are just doing the sprints. So how do I look at those systems and recognize that, you know what, plyometrics is a form of strength training. Is strength training a form of plyometrics? Maybe not, but can it make plyometrics better? You know, again, you're looking at how things sort of nest and interrelate with each other too. So that becomes difficult, doesn't it? And so sometimes maybe the decision is forced on you. That, you know, really I've got more opportunity to do this in the field than I have in the weight room. So there's the discussion with the player in that part-time environment, right? Hey, listen, you know, you really got to get to a weight room outside of here, you know, to try and do this. And people listen to this might be surprised that a player at a semi-professional or high amateur level doesn't have access to weight rooms, but that's the reality, right? And depends on their job. I mean, I remember working with Pete, you know, at you know, he was a concrete breaker. That was his job. He wasn't coming in and wanting to do a load of high intensity stuff, you know, at the same time. So you have to look at the individual situations a little bit and the constraints in your environment, and that's okay. That's none of us work in these ideal situations. And I think through the Need for Speed course, that really makes you realize it's okay. Just consider your options and have a you know, a thought process you're going through that allows you to keep, with trial and error, just nudging things forward. And, you know, we get caught in this world of everything trying to be so precise. We talk about that a lot in the course as well, that precision versus significance, you know. It's okay to fail forward safely, you know, and change your mind. You know, it's okay for it not to be exactly what's in the research. I mean, Dr. You know, Sophia Nymphius makes a great point that really the most admirable challenge is that those of us who look what's in the research, we try and apply it, realize it doesn't work, but then we're prepared to adapt it to our situation and then report back to people how that is actually working as well. So, you know, just be confident, encourage yourselves to think problems through, and recognize that every solution isn't in a book and a research paper, you know, and that the system you're working on, you know, you need to understand that it needs to connect with the next level of that system. If it isn't and it's not connected, then, you know, you're looking at the wrong picture. And ultimately, the big picture is the game itself, right? How does it influence what they do in the game itself? And you know, right? I mean, think about, how do you get buy-in with players? You know, do you talk about the golf game, or do you talk about how this training is going to help them in the game? What do you do?
I do exactly that. I took it a notch farther this summer when we prepared the preseason. is I outlined my preseason, I planned it out, and then I actually made a little keynote presentation for the players, recorded it, sent it to them, and then allowed them to come and ask questions on another Zoom call.
Nice.
And simply laying it out and explaining, this is why we're doing this section here, this is why we're progressing here, this is why you're not wearing your cleats from day one, this is why we only put them on for 10 minutes at the end of session one. And in the end, I just had a bunch of guys who are all, you know, amateur players. They train twice a week. They want to, you know, win the game on the weekend. A bunch of them do a bit of work on the, you know, a bit of training outside of this, but a lot of them just come to Tuesday, Thursday training, and that's what they get. And what I found is that I had, you know, between 30 and 40 guys all preseason long, which was about 6 weeks. It's the biggest numbers we'd ever had for preseason at the club. And you just saw guys were invested in it because they knew why they were there and they knew why we were doing what we were doing. And that was a huge step forward for me and a big learning, you know, opportunity, that the clearer your communication is. And obviously it worked well because I knew the guys before and I had done a year with them prior. Maybe, you know, barreling into a new club and doing it like that might not have worked because I didn't have that relationship with them prior to, but definitely in that situation, I think it was the best way to do it. And it was huge from a buy-in perspective.
You know, you made me think to reflect on something you said a little bit earlier about, you know, the player that's fast but doesn't do it in the game, you know. And sometimes you get those academy players that come up and, you know, they're off the mark, right? And they're fast, but they're off the mark in terms of what's going on. And here's the interesting fact, and it sounds really simple, but I don't know how we all necessarily always think about this. You cannot be faster in the game than you are running in a straight line, right? Yeah. Because as soon as you go, there's more information. Information slows you down. It just does, you know, and the more complex that information and your inability to process it, the slower you're going to be. So, you know, these academy players that come up because they've not played with these players, or the environment's different, or again, just the patterns out there are different. And that's kind of why it's important that academies are linked to their first team, right, in style of play and things like that. So, you know, the way they see patterns and things need to be somewhat similar. But you know, you can't run faster in the game than how fast you can run. If that makes sense. And
it does, yeah.
The information's key, isn't it?
Yeah, I like what you just said. It reminds me, I mean, it's the same on the conditioning side. If you look, for example, at a, you know, cyclical capacity, maximum capacity, if you want to talk about VO2 max, is always going to be either equal or above your, you know, sport specific capacity. Because now there's maybe for very, let's say, cyclical sports, your performance is going to be highly correlated to your VO2 max. But then once you introduce game variables and skills and decision making, that's always going to, you know, take it at least a notch down. And so, you know, sometimes just training the sport is good enough, but when you reach that ceiling of, you know, maybe my game speed is the same as my absolute speed, if we want to qualify it like that, now you need to transition and work on that aspect to get the ceiling a little bit higher, because you're not going to break through that
that's a good point
in the game itself.
Well, yeah, and also I guess you know, the question comes on, why should we train like track athletes, right? Same question, why do we all get so anal about weightlifting technique, right? There's the technical model to work to. Why shouldn't we aspire to build towards that technical model? But none of us are going to lift the loads that elite weightlifters lift. None of us are going to get, you know, near the speeds, you know, or at the speeds that, you know, elite track and field athletes play at. But, you know, one of the things is that we speak about information. I don't want my player thinking, can I get there? They should know they've got the speed to get there. Let's take that information away from them. You know, when I'm running upright, you know, and I've got the ball in my hand, or I'm breaking away, I don't want to be thinking, oh, is my hamstring going to go? Information, that's noise. No, it's not relevant information. So I think spending some time on the rules, as we call them, you know, learning the rules of acceleration and upright running, acceleration to top end speed, is all sprinting, by the way, you know, The upright running style and acceleration, we have that difference in the shapes and the patterns there that we talk about in the book. But getting people efficient at that and confident in that, don't you think that kind of takes some of the information out that they have to process? What's your thoughts on that?
Can you reframe that a little bit?
So, can I get off the mark? I don't feel that distance is too far for me. Or when I'm upright and I'm supporting my guy, can I make another little break? It's, the idea of do they have the ability to do something shouldn't even be in their thinking,
No, they should be just, doing what feels right on the moment. And then, yeah, if they do feel like they're limited and they can't express what they're looking to express, or they feel like they could express it, to a wider extent or bigger extent or a faster extent, then we need to come back to the training aspect and how we fix that.
Yeah, getting feedback from the players on that's going to be key as well, right? But then being part of that decision-making process.
Yeah, like you said, getting the point of view of the athlete and what do they feel when they're doing it. That can sometimes give us a lot of information that can guide the coaching process, or even just what cue you're going to use with them or what you're going to tell them, depending on what they felt, might just do the trick in some instances, and you don't need to go through a whole training block.
Hey, and there's a great example of non-linear progression, right? You 6 weeks of training, you give them one cue and boom, it's done. It's like, there you go, right? We get these breakthrough moments. And Cam Joss talks to that in the course as well, but there's breakthrough moments, and things just seem to, the stars align, and it happens because it just resonates and clicks with a player. And that's kind of one of the reasons we've got so many different contributors to the course, is that it's good to hear the way different people talk about the same thing, because you pick up different cues and you're able to use those cues in a variety of ways to influence maybe how that person is moving, or help them with their meaning and understanding of how they need to move in the game. And one thing comes to mind, the framework that Stuart built for decision making in there. What's the problem? First of all, is it clear? Is it a simple problem, a clear problem, or is it complicated? You have you can think of your rugby forwards, right? They're lunging out and their arms out, and their shoulder gets hurt in the tackle because they just haven't manoeuvred into the right position to be effective in the collision, and this guy's doing it time and time again. So is that a clear problem, or a complicated problem, or a complex problem? So how do you then, what's the next level of thinking you go to once you identify the nature of the problem? Do you train them in context? Do you simplify, or do you decontextualize? And, just do some with, stepping drills. Go through ladders laterally or something, right? I mean, I'm not a big fan of that, but that's the options, right, as well. And then that helps with the methodology that you're about to choose, the type of training that we're going to do with those people, and then is that problem then managed? So I think that the framework, decision-making framework that Stu come up with as well, helps us alongside that OODA loop approach, identify the methodology we would like to employ. And we mentioned constraints earlier as well, in terms of your training environment. So when you look to that framework, did you have any kind of thoughts around that?
Well, I think what you mentioned in, breaking down a problem that you see on the field of play, and then determining what is going to be the right, solution to fix that problem. For me, it's almost how far back are you going to have to go to make it accessible to that player at that point in time, to then build him back up to what he needs to do in the game. Maybe it's as simple as just, give him a clear instruction or a cue that he's never heard before, or that maybe didn't resonate in the past, and now he's able to do that right away. Maybe, like you said, you have to peel, one layer off the onion and go back to something outside of a, kind of a high physical and emotional stressful situation in the game, and maybe remove the opposition, and now you can get him moving better. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe you have to go all the way back to, like you said, can he shuffle laterally effectively without tripping over his own feet? Maybe that's how deep the problem is. And then following that sequence back up, how fast can I go? can I skip some steps on the way back and still retain everything that I need to retain? And then down the line, when I have to make another decision about a similar case, now I have that experience about the framework that I used previously. Can I use the same one? Is that different player going to respond to the same sequencing of different exercises going back up to the situation in the game? So it just adds a lot of, for me, the framework adds some clarity to the process of thinking about problems. So that's the main thing that I got out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, practically, you know, when I could think of this particular forward right now, and it was almost again what they saw alarmed them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a let's get at them. It was just that momentary delay, which then meant based on where the opposing player was, they move laterally rather than forward. Now, being big players, you know, they kind of topple, right? So that gives them a sense of danger again. So they go wide in their base.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're wide in their base. They lack maneuverability. The good attacking player is going to spot that shape, so they're going to run on an angle to the side. So they're only left with that lunge and that shoulder into the player, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know you can picture that. So you know what I learned from the acceleration elements was that, you know, the projection, rhythm, and rise. Now, these big guys are not going to have the same projection angles as your shorter guys. They're not starting in a crouched position, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are starting more upright. You know, I'd play with a drill, and I use ladders for this because I think it helped visually, where they would start in the first rung of the ladder, and you know they would, you know, you'd set up some kind of defensive tackle drill where they would then break out and accelerate forward. Then you start them in the second rung. What does that mean? Their projections are going to change because they're going to step outside it. You know, so it just built an understanding, if you like, that you're telling the brain that, hey, you've got the capacity to do this. You know, you can change that a little bit. Where these guys typically like to stay upright, right? Working with those big tour athletes. So just working on the acceleration, using some of the, you know, the coaching cues and the, you know, the identification of the shapes and patterns from that really helped in this situation, because the player didn't feel like they could get off the mark fast. You know, they're big, heavy guys. They feel that ground under their feet and think the ground's their enemy. Mm-hmm. You know, the ground's their friend. Push against it. It's helping you. You know, push that ground, you know, down and back, and rather than it feeling heavy underneath their body. You know, so that was, I think that really helped me. You know, from a straight sort of track acceleration technical model perspective to work through this particular problem.